Hey, it's Miss V. Welcome back, and we are here for another edition or another lesson in Imperialism. This is Guided Notes 11.3. We got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Alright, so here we are looking at level 2, being able to describe the causes and effects of imperialism in Africa. These are your vocabulary words, just two of them, annex and indigenous. You can stop the video here if you would like to make sure that you get these vocabulary words on your guided notes paper. Okay. All right, here's number 1. Question is, before 1880, who represent the interests of European countries? Those were African rulers and merchants. So before 1880, Europeans didn't really have an idea per se of, or had a lot of knowledge of Africa. So when it came to trade, they would directly trade with African rulers and merchants in Africa and back and forth. It wasn't like they were literally physically there. Okay. However, after the Industrial Revolution and their interest grew in terms of having raw materials and new markets, now they are intense in terms of getting colonies in Africa, and that intensity was among the major European nations, as you see here: Great Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Okay, and they had this bitter rivalry that grew very intense among themselves to try to capitalize and colonize as much of Africa as possible. Okay, so that's number 1. This is number 2. As you see here, in West Africa, they took a keen interest in the raw materials like peanuts, timber, animal hides, and palm oil. Okay, so the French was able to obtain a lot of West Africa. As you see here, they were able to get the Gold Coast, French Guinea, Mauritania, Senegal, so on and so forth. So they were still interested in precious metals and resources like ivory and gold and silver, etc., and copper, but they did have their eye and interest on the raw materials such as petroleum and iron and timber, as you see here, peanuts and so forth, so that they can use them in their manufacturing. Okay. All right. So here's number 3. This is in Northern Africa now. Muhammad Ali, which was an Ottoman Sultan, not the boxer, but the Ottoman Sultan, was able to seize power and then establish a separate Egyptian state, meaning that he was able to create a separate Egyptian country with borders. Okay. So within his reign or his rule, he was able to bring Egypt into the modern world and industrialize it by creating an army. He modernized the army, set up a public school system, created small industries that refined sugar and textiles, producing textiles, ammunition, and shipbuilding. Okay, and that's what happened in Northern Africa. Also in Northern Africa, this area here, which is number 4, between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, which is here, there was a growing importance to build a canal here. And a canal is sort of a strip of land or a piece of mechanism in order to get ships through a small area. Okay, so what they did is that this canal would be able to transport steamships from Europe easily through Asia, right? And that would allow trade to happen much easier than having to go around the Cape of Africa, which is down here. That area is very treacherous. The waters are extremely dangerous. And then of course it's much longer, right? So if they were able to build this canal, it would make it much easier to just go from Europe to Asia, right? And trade. So that area is going to be taken over by the British. So they built this canal called the Suez Canal. And now with the control of the Suez Canal, that is going to protect their interest in Asia, namely India. And now they are able to trade between Europe and Asia as well. Okay, so that's 4, 5, and 6. All right, number 7. David Livingstone. Dr. David Livingstone was a 27-year-old medical missionary, so he would travel to Africa often. And he became known as this explorer, and he explored areas in Central Africa that were not explored by any Europeans at that time. That's what we mean by uncharted, and I have the information here. Unexplored or not mapped by Europeans. Of course, there were tribes that existed there, but as far as Europeans are concerned, they were not aware of those areas yet until Dr. David Livingstone, until he made his way through there. Okay. So he trekked in certain areas and explored much of the interior of the continent here in Central Africa, along the Zambezi River, along the southern part of the Nile, and made some treks here through the Limpopo River, past a little bit, and as you see here, down to the Cape of Good Hope, or Cape Town, as you see here. Okay. And made a lot of treks, as you see. The more treks he made, the more he was able to open up Central Africa to be known to Europeans, and that's how Europeans started to have a lot of interest in Central Africa. Okay. All right, this is 8 and 9. As I mentioned, now Europeans have this great interest in being in Central Africa. Namely, one of them was Belgium, and the king of Belgium at that time was Leopold II. This is him here, and he was a driving force of colonizing the Congo, which is in Central Africa. Before it was by their name, they gave the name Zaire to that area, but now it is called the Republic of the Congo. Okay, the Congo is what was called before. Okay, now it has gone back in its modern time today to the Congo, Republic of the Congo, but it was once called Zaire. Okay. However, he was how can I say, he was not a very benevolent ruler, because in his eyes, he wanted to civilize that area, because he saw it as somewhere that was pierced in darkness, that the populations were ignorant of European civilized life, and he figured that it was his pursuit or his crusade to civilize that area. In his pursuit and in his rule, he committed so much atrocities that over, as you see, as many as 10 million, I'm sure it's probably over than that, as many as 10 million people died in the Congolese Free State. Okay, and that's a lot of people. So these are some of the images of the atrocities that happened. As you see here, many of the people have lost their hands. Many of them are children, okay, and teens. So much so that a political cartoon was made of Leopold basically being a python and strangling the life out of the Congolese because of how bad the atrocities were. Okay. Alright, so here's number 10. There are certain countries that also claimed East Africa, which was Germany, and they came late into the imperialist race for Africa, but nonetheless they got claim to parts of Africa. Also Britain, again, got parts of East Africa so that they can connect their colonies to Egypt. Okay. And then Portugal and Belgium also claim parts of East Africa, as you see here, Mozambique, Madagascar, and so forth. And we know of definitely the Congo. Okay, so that's number 10, and that's in East Africa. All right, the Berlin Conference. We talked about the Berlin Conference before, but just to go into more detail. In the Berlin Conference, again, remember that they held this conference in Berlin, Germany. This is Otto von Bismarck, the chancellor or the leader of Germany at the time. And he is literally carving or dividing, I should say, the African continent so that certain European nations can get their or claim their territory. So in this case, as you see here for number 11, the British and Germany claimed their territory in Eastern Africa. Portugal had their clear claim for Mozambique, which is in Eastern Africa. The French already had Western Africa, so that was their claim. And then, of course, the British were able to get parts of South Africa, which we'll talk about in a minute. However, with all of this dividing up of Africa into different parts, they did not consider ethnicity, they did not consider religion, language, nothing, okay, when they were carving up Africa amongst themselves. So when they're carving up Africa like that, and establishing borders, they did not consider ethnic groups that may have been warring with each other, and now those ethnic groups are going to be in one particular country or one, you know, bordered country, and now there's going to be ongoing conflicts between those two tribes or those two ethnic groups, and it's going to make their rule easier, because basically if they're warring, they could just exterminate themselves, right? And now these European nations are able to come into power much quicker and easier because of tribalism, right? Also, many of the African delegates or any representation from any tribe whatsoever in any part of the African continent, which is pretty huge, the second largest continent on the planet, were not present at this conference. So they had no say in what was happening to their land or what was happening to the continent itself. Okay, so that's 11, 12, and 13. All right, so in South Africa, the Boers were descendants of Dutch settlers. Now, they were not original Dutch settlers. Original in this case meaning the ones that started, okay, or that started the exploration, and they left Holland and went to that area of southern Africa maybe in the 1700s, okay. They were called the Boers, okay, and because of their interest in South Africa, because of its resources, the white population grew dramatically, especially when the British was able to seize that power after they defeated Napoleon. And once they did, British settlers came into South Africa, Southern Africa, and now they call it Cape Colony, and they established a town called Cape Town. And we also know this point down here called the Cape of Good Hope, okay. So that is 14. So the Boers, and I would not call them Afrikaners because they the original people that lived there, that inhabited there, or the Africans, okay. They are also known as Afrikaners in South Africa, and you may hear that being referenced often, but they were Boers, okay, and that's what they were called as Dutch settlers, okay. So this is 15 and 16. The Boers were disgusted with British rule, but they moved northward to avoid the British, okay. Of course, almost the same thing that they were disgusted with. Imagine what native tribes were going through, right? So they are feeling the same disgust that native tribes are feeling from both ends, from the British and the Boers, right? Because the Boers believe, and not just the Boers, the British as well, believe that their white superiority was ordained by God, okay? And they felt that any non-Europeans in this case Africans, that were in their society, they should be laborers and servants and not have any status or high status in their society. Okay, but one group that they frequently battled, the Boers had constant battles with, was the indigenous, meaning the original inhabitants, was the Zulu tribe, the Zulu people. Okay, one particular talented, extremely intelligent leader, his name was Shaka, of the Zulu tribe, was able to carve out their empire. He was able to keep the Boers at bay and keep them away from colonizing his area. Okay, and even up until Shaka's death, the Zulu was still powerful. However, the Zulu nation succumbed somewhat when they were defeated by the British military. Okay, when the British came in and joined the fight along with the Boers, the same Boers that did not like the British coming and colonizing, but they joined with the Boers and defeated the Zulu. Okay, the Zulu nation in that sense. Now, the Zulu nations have not been exterminated, meaning that they're gone. No, they just were able to subdue them enough to colonize their territory. Okay, and if you're interested in seeing more about Shaka and his fight against the Boers and partly so the British, a good movie to watch would be Shaka. Okay, and it's a great series, a great movie to watch, because you will be able to learn more about how he was able to drive the Boers and somewhat the British out of his territory for a while. Okay, all right, so this is 17. This is about Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes had a lot of policy that influenced South Africa. He created a lot of the policies, the British policies, and he also founded a diamond and gold mining company that made him rich beyond measure, right? Even up until this day, the De Beers Diamond Company was his company that was founded by him, and people still, celebrities, so forth, still buy diamonds, or there's jewelry companies that still buy diamonds and gold from the De Beers company to this day. Okay, Rhodes was also a great champion of British expansion. So as you see here in this political cartoon, he is kind of holding the puppet strings to manipulate or to control British policy so that Britain can have as much of the colonies in Africa as possible. As you see here, from South to North Africa, he's covering it as this colossal giant of Britain, right? And not only that, as a capitalist, having control of the resources there as well. All right, so this is 18. Indirect rule means that that there's the existing rule that was in those areas in Africa, they're relying on those existing rules. However, that was sort of a facade, or as you see here, it was a fraud, because the British that followed that position, even though they had a local ruler there, that local ruler was only there to give or to carry out the major decisions that was made by the British administrators, right? They weren't making any decisions at all. That was done by the British administrators that was sent by Britain into their African colonies, so to say. Okay, whereas in other areas, many other European nations like the French used direct rule, where they had appointed people from France go into their quote-unquote colonies and govern that way, right? So there was no native people making decisions in direct rule. They would send, European nations would send their people down, and then they would render all the decisions in direct rule. Okay, and this is 19 and 20. Of course, many of the Africans in Africa are going to be upset with colonization, because in colonization, imperialism, right? They're losing their farmlands, they're losing their territory, they're losing their land. They're working on plantations for little to next to none, or from, you know, no money whatsoever. And they're working in factories, and these factories are run by foreigners. They have no idea who these foreigners are. The foreigners are not doing anything for them. So they are concerned. Also, because as you see here, there's a new class and a new society that is emerging, because when schools are set up by these European or Western nations, now a new generation of Africans are learning about Western ideals and Western principles, right, of government and, you know, democracy and capitalism and so forth. So they're like, you know, now they're educated, right? And they're seeing how they're confused as to how these colonial rulers are coming in and taking over their lands, right? And trying to quote unquote civilize their area, right? So they fiercely hated colonial rule, and because they fiercely hated this colonial rule, they naturally came together to assert their own nationality and their own cultural authority. And that's what influenced the modern nationalism in Africa. Those hopes of being a nation and those resentment that they had against European nations coming in and colonizing them spurred modern nationalism in Africa, and then eventually became spurred on independence movements in Africa as well. All right, good. So that's 19 and 20. And this is your activity here. You're going to use this chart to answer the questions. All of the answers are in this chart. If you have any questions about it, let me know in class, or drop me a question and I'll get to you. All right, thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Peace.